He was 16 when the door closed behind him for the last time. It wasn't loud. No shouting. No broken plates. Just a quiet click that somehow felt heavier than any slam. He stood on the porch for a moment, staring at the wood grain of the door, hoping it might open again. It didn't. His hands were shaking as he pulled on his thin hoodie. The cold air slipped right through it. Behind him, his little sister hugged their small dog to her chest. The dog's ears were flat, its tail tucked low. It knew something was wrong. "Are we coming back soon?" his sister asked. He swallowed hard. "Yeah, just not right now." He didn't tell her the truth. He didn't tell her that the adults inside had already decided they were no longer welcome. He didn't tell her that the words, "we can't do this anymore," were still ringing in his ears. They walked down the street with no real direction. Cars passed. People hurried by with warm coats and shopping bags. No one looked twice at a teenage boy carrying a backpack, a little girl holding a dog, and 3 shadows stretched long on the sidewalk. He checked his phone. 3% battery. No signal from the relatives he had tried calling earlier. Each unanswered call felt like another door quietly closing. He had packed fast. 2 shirts. 1 pair of socks. A charger that wouldn't matter without power. His sister's favorite toy, a small stuffed bear with 1 loose eye. He almost forgot the dog food, but grabbed it at the last second. They reached the bus stop and sat on the cold metal bench. The sky was already turning gray, even though it wasn't late yet. Winter came early in this part of town. He wrapped his arm around his sister and pulled her close. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. The dog crawled into his lap, shaking. "I'm hungry," she said softly. He opened his backpack and handed her the last granola bar. He told her he'd already eaten. He hadn't. A small TV inside a nearby store window played the afternoon news. He couldn't hear the words clearly, but he saw the weather map. Bright colors spread across the screen. A storm was moving in, the kind that brought heavy rain and sharp wind. He looked up at the clouds. Not now, he thought. Please, not now. They stayed at the bus stop until their legs went numb. When no bus came, he stood and helped his sister up. "We're gonna find a better place," he said. He didn't know where that would be. They walked for blocks. Past closed shops. Past people who avoided eye contact. Past homes with warm lights glowing behind curtains. He tried 1 more number on his phone. It went straight to voicemail. The screen went dark right after battery dead. His sister started coughing, a dry sound that made his chest tighten. He rubbed her back and told her to take slow breaths. They found a narrow space behind an old building where the wind didn't hit as hard. Someone had left broken boxes there, along with a torn plastic sheet. He pulled everything together, building a small wall. It wasn't much, but it was something. He gave his sister his hoodie and wrapped the plastic around them both. He sat with his back against the cold brick and pulled the dog close to his chest. She fell asleep quickly, exhausted from crying earlier. He stayed awake. He counted cars. He counted breaths. He replayed the afternoon in his head, wondering what he could have said differently. He remembered the tired faces of the adults inside, the way they avoided his eyes. He remembered the final words. "You're old enough to figure it out." Old enough. He was 16. He thought about school, about homework he hadn't turned in, about the job application he filled out last week, hoping to help with bills, about all the normal things that suddenly felt very far away. The wind picked up. Cold crept into his fingers and toes. He shifted carefully so he wouldn't wake his sister. His stomach growled, but he ignored it. A man walked by and dropped a coin near their shelter. He didn't stop. He didn't look back. The coin rolled into a crack in the pavement and disappeared. He closed his eyes for a moment and leaned his head against the wall. He thought about his mom's laugh from years ago, about movie nights on the couch, About mornings when breakfast smelled like toast and coffee. It felt like another lifetime. The dog whimpered. He stroked its fur and whispered, "It's okay. I got you." He wasn't sure if he was saying it to the dog, his sister, or himself. Hours passed slowly. The sky darkened. Streetlights flickered on, casting yellow circles on wet pavement. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed. His sister stirred. "Is it morning?" She asked. "Not yet," he said. "Try to sleep." She nodded and hugged the stuffed bear tighter. He checked the plastic sheet. Rain had started, light at first, tapping softly. He adjusted it to keep the drops off her face. He knew they couldn't stay here much longer. He stood quietly and scanned the street. Down the block, a closed community center had a small overhang by its entrance. It wasn't open, but it might give them better cover. He carefully lifted his sister into his arms. She wrapped her arms around his neck without waking. He tucked the dog inside his jacket and walked slowly, step by step. Afraid of slipping, they made it to the overhang just as the rain began to fall harder. He set his sister down and used the backpack as a pillow for her head. He sat beside her, knees pulled up, arms wrapped around his legs. He watched the rain hit the ground and spread into dark patches. He thought about asking strangers for help. But every time he imagined walking up to someone, his chest tightened. He didn't want pity. He just wanted safety. He pulled his sister closer and whispered a promise into her hair. "I won't leave you. I don't care how cold it gets." She didn't answer. She was asleep again. He stayed awake. The news replayed in his mind. Storm warnings. Falling temperatures. Possible flooding. He looked down at his sister's pale face, and then at the small dog curled between them. He was 16. He had no money, no phone, no place to go. But he had them. And as the rain turned heavier and the wind began to howl through empty streets, he made a quiet decision. No matter what came with that storm, he would stand between it and his family, even if it meant freezing first. Morning came slowly. Like it was afraid to face them. The rain had stopped, but everything was wet. The concrete was cold. The air felt heavy, and his fingers were stiff when he finally stood up. His back hurt from sitting all night, and his legs felt weak. But he didn't complain. He gently touched his sister's shoulder. "Hey," he whispered. "Wake up." She opened her eyes and blinked at the gray sky. "Did we sleep here?" she asked. "Just for the night," he said, trying to sound normal. "We'll find something better today." The dog stretched and shook its fur, sending tiny drops of water everywhere. He helped his sister stand and brushed dirt off her pants with his hands. Her shoes were soaked. He could tell her toes were cold just by looking at her. His stomach hurt, but he ignored it. They walked toward a small shopping street nearby. Some stores were opening. Workers lifted metal gates. The smell of coffee drifted through the air, making his mouth water. He stopped outside a bakery and stared through the window at warm bread on shelves. His sister held his hand tighter. "Can we get some?" she asked. He looked down at her, then at his empty pockets. "Not right now," he said softly. "Later, okay?" She nodded, even though he knew she didn't really understand. They kept walking. He saw a trash bin behind one of the shops and waited until no one was looking. He checked inside. Mostly paper and old cups. At the bottom, he found half a sandwich wrapped in plastic. It looked clean. He took it. He gave the bigger piece to his sister and the smaller one to the dog. He told her he wasn't hungry. Again. They sat on the steps of a closed office building while she ate. He watched people pass by, all moving fast, all busy with their own lives. A few looked at them. Most didn't. A woman walked past and dropped $1 near their feet. She didn't stop. He picked it up slowly, like it might disappear. That dollar felt heavier than anything he had ever held. He used it to buy 2 small cups of hot water from a street vendor. The man added sugar without asking. He wrapped the cups in napkins and handed one to his sister. She smiled for the first time since yesterday. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and took a small sip from the other cup. Careful not to burn his tongue. Warmth spread through his chest that it didn't last long. By midday, clouds started gathering again. The wind picked up, pushing empty wrappers across the sidewalk. His sister began coughing more, and her cheeks looked pale. He rubbed her arms to keep her warm. "We'll find a place," he said, even though he had no idea where. They walked until his feet felt like blocks of ice. Behind an abandoned store, he found a pile of broken wood and cardboard. He dragged everything together, building another small shelter. It was worse than the first one. He used a plastic sheet again, tying it to a fence with a piece of string he found on the ground. He laid cardboard on the floor so his sister wouldn't sit directly on the cold concrete. She curled up beside the dog and closed her eyes. He sat outside the shelter, watching the street. He thought about school again. He thought about the teacher who once told him he was good at writing. He thought about the job interview he never got to attend. He felt like his life had been paused, frozen in this moment. A man in a heavy coat stopped nearby. "You kids okay?" the man asked. He stood up fast. "We're fine," he said. The man looked at his sister and the dog, then pulled out a small paper bag and handed it to him. Inside were 2 apples and a packet of crackers. "Take care," the man said before walking away. His hand shook as he thanked him. He gave 1 apple to his sister and saved the crackers for later. As afternoon turned into evening, the sky grew darker. Wind pushed through the alley, making the plastic sheet flap loudly. His sister started shivering. He wrapped her in every piece of cardboard and cloth they had. He took off his shoes and gave her his brastas. Socks. His feet burned from the cold. He held her close and told her stories about when they were younger, about playing in the park, about the time their dog chased a butterfly and ran into a bush. She laughed weakly. That laugh kept him going. Nearby, a TV inside another store showed the news again. This time, he could hear it. The storm was getting stronger. Heavy rain expected. Possible flooding. People were told to stay indoors. He looked down at his sister. They had no indoors. Rain started falling again, harder than before. Water pooled around their shelter. He stood up and tried to block the wind with his body. His jacket was soaked within minutes. His sister's coughing got worse. He picked her up, holding her tight, and tucked the dog under his arm. "We're moving," he said. She rested her head on his shoulder. Too tired to argue, he walked through the rain, slipping once and catching himself on a wall. His knee scraped, but he didn't feel it. He saw a closed grocery store ahead with a small covered entrance. He made it there just as thunder rolled across the sky. He set his sister down and wrapped her in the plastic sheet again. He rubbed her hands, trying to bring feeling back into her fingers. She looked up at him with tired eyes. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked. He forced a smile. "Yes," he said. "I promise." He didn't know how he could promise that. He sat beside her, holding her and the dog, while rain poured down and wind howled through empty streets. His teeth chattered. His arms ached, but he didn't let go. Not once. Cars passed by, their headlights cutting through the rain. Sirens echoed somewhere far away. The world kept moving, even while theirs stood still. He closed his eyes and whispered a quiet prayer. Not sure who he was praying to. Just, "Please." His sister fell asleep against his chest. He stayed awake. He watched the rain. He watched the shadows. And as the storm grew louder and the cold crept deeper into his bones, he held his family close and waited for whatever was coming next. The storm didn't arrive slowly. It crashed into the city like it had been waiting all day. Rain slammed against the sidewalk. Wind pushed trash and leaves down the street. Thunder rolled so loud it made his sister jump in her sleep. He tightened his arms around her and the dog, trying to make himself into a wall between them and the world. Water began running along the curb, carrying cups and paper with it. His shoes were already soaked. His hands were numb. He looked down at his sister's face. Her lips were pale, and her breathing sounded rough. Every small cough made his heart race. "Hey," he whispered. "Stay with me." She opened her eyes just long enough to nod. He stood up. Even though his legs felt weak, they couldn't stay here. The covered entrance was filling with water, and the wind was blowing rain straight inside. He picked his sister up again, holding her tight against his chest. He tucked the dog inside his jacket and stepped back into the storm. Rain hit his face like tiny needles. He bent forward and pushed through it, one slow step at a time. Cars drove past, spraying dirty water onto the sidewalk. A bus rushed by, shaking the ground. People hurried under umbrellas, their heads down, their faces hidden. He didn't blame them. He just wished one of them would stop. He slipped on the wet pavement and fell to one knee. Pain shot up his leg, but he didn't let go. He used a nearby wall to pull himself back up. His sister clung to him. "You're okay," he told her, even though he wasn't sure. He spotted a small parking garage ahead, its entrance open. It wasn't much, but it was dry. He made it there and set his sister down near the wall. He wrapped the plastic sheet around her and rubbed her arms hard to bring warmth back into them. She shivered. "I'm cold," she whispered. "I know," he said. "I'm here." He gave her the last dry part of his shirt and pressed his own body against hers to share heat. The dog curled between them, trembling. He tried to remember the last time he felt safe, that it felt far away. Water started creeping into the garage entrance. The storm drains couldn't keep up. He watched the thin stream grow wider. Panic rose in his chest. He picked his sister up again. "We're moving," he said. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew they had to keep moving. He walked through streets that looked different in the rain. Store signs flickered. Wind rattled metal gates. Somewhere, glass shattered. His arms burned from holding his sister. His back ached. His fingers felt stiff around her small coat. But he didn't stop. She rested her head on his shoulder, too tired to cry anymore. He followed the sound of sirens until he saw flashing lights ahead. An emergency shelter had been set up inside a school gym. People lined up outside, wrapped in blankets. His heart jumped. He hurried toward it. A worker stood at the entrance, checking people in. He stepped forward, holding his sister close. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "She's sick." The worker looked at his sister's face, then at the dog. "Come inside," the worker said. Those two words almost made him collapse. Inside, the air was warm. Bright lights filled the gym. Cots lined the walls. Volunteers moved around with clipboards and trays of food. He set his sister down on a cot while someone brought blankets. A nurse knelt beside them and gently checked his sister's temperature. She listened to her breathing and nodded. "She's cold and exhausted," the nurse said. "But you got her here in time." He didn't realize he was crying until tears dropped onto his hands. Another volunteer brought water and soup. He helped his sister sit up and fed her slowly, spoon by spoon. Color slowly returned to her cheeks. The dog was given food and wrapped in a towel. It wagged its tail weakly. He finally sat down for the first time in hours. His body started shaking. Now that he didn't have to stay strong, a woman with kind eyes sat beside him. "You did good," she said quietly. He stared at the floor. "I just didn't want them to freeze," he said. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You kept them alive," she replied. Those words hit him harder than the storm. Later, a caseworker spoke with him in a quiet corner of the gym. He told his story in short pieces. About being sent away. About sleeping outside. About trying to find food. The caseworker listened without interrupting. "We're going to help you," the caseworker said. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." He nodded, not trusting his voice. That night, his sister slept on a clean cot under thick blankets. The dog curled up beside her. He sat on the floor next to them, watching her chest rise and fall. For the first time in days, the wind couldn't reach them. Rain still fell outside. Sirens still echoed. But inside the gym, there was warmth. He leaned his head against the cot and closed his eyes. He thought about how close they had come to losing everything. He thought about how fast life could change. He was 16. He had no home, no plan, no clear future. But his sister was breathing calmly. The dog was sleeping peacefully. And for tonight, that was enough. As he drifted off, exhausted beyond words, one thought stayed with him. They survived the storm. Whatever came next, they would face it together. He woke up to soft voices and the smell of soup. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then he saw the rows of cots, the gym lights, and his sister sleeping beside him. The dog lifted its head and wagged its tail. They were still inside. They were safe. His body felt heavy, like every muscle had been used too much. His clothes were dry now, but stiff. Someone had placed another blanket over his sister during the night. He sat up slowly, afraid to wake her. A volunteer walked past and smiled. "Morning," she said. "You made it through a rough one." He nodded. Double quotes, "Thank you," he said quietly. She handed him a small tray with oatmeal and a banana. He stared at it for a second before taking it. He gave most of it to his sister. When she woke, she ate slowly, still tired, but her cough sounded lighter. The nurse came back to check on her and said she was improving. Those words felt like air returning to his lungs. Later that morning, a caseworker asked him to sit down at a folding table near the wall. Papers were spread out, along with a clipboard and a pen. "Tell me everything," the caseworker said gently. He took a deep breath. He talked about being told to leave, about walking all night, about finding food in trash bins, about trying to keep his sister warm, about the storm. His voice shook, but he didn't stop. The caseworker listened without judging. Every so often, they nodded and wrote something down. "You've been carrying a lot," the caseworker said. "You shouldn't have had to do this alone." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't have a choice," he said. The caseworker explained there were programs for teens in his situation. Emergency housing, help with school, support for his sister, even pet-friendly shelters. Each word sounded unreal. Help. He wasn't used to that word. Volunteer brought clothes donated by local families. Clean jeans, warm socks, a jacket that actually fit. His sister received a soft sweater and new shoes. She smiled when she put them on. "I like these," she said. He smiled back. The dog got a small blanket of its own and a bowl of food. For the first time in days, they looked like a normal little family. That afternoon, he helped stack chairs and carry boxes for the volunteers. He didn't have to, but he wanted to feel useful. His body still hurt, but moving kept his mind busy. A man thanked him and handed him a cup of hot tea. He held it between his palms, letting the warmth sink in. His sister sat nearby, coloring on a piece of paper someone had given her. She drew their dog, then drew him, then herself. Above them, she drew a big sun. "Look," she said. Holding it up, he swallowed hard. "That's beautiful," he told her. Later, the caseworker returned with news. They had found temporary housing through a youth program. It wasn't fancy. Just a small room with 2 beds and a bathroom down the hall. But it was indoors, and it was warm. He closed his eyes when he heard that. "When can we go?" he asked. "Tonight," the caseworker said. His chest tightened. Tonight, they packed their few things into his backpack. Volunteers hugged his sister. Someone gave them a small bag of groceries and a toy for the dog. As they walked out of the shelter, he looked back once. The gym had been loud and crowded, but it had saved them. Outside, the storm had passed. Puddles reflected the sky. The air smelled clean, like everything had been washed new. They rode in a van with other families. His sister leaned against him, half asleep. He stared out the window, watching buildings slide by. He felt tired in a way that went deeper than his bones. The housing building was quiet. A staff member showed them their room. 2 beds, a small table, a lamp. That was all, but it felt like a palace. His sister bounced onto one bed and laughed. "We have our own place," she said. He sat on the other bed and let out a slow breath. He hadn't realized how tense he'd been until that moment. That night, they took hot showers. He watched steam rise from the bathroom mirror. His sister wrapped herself in a towel and smiled. The dog ran in circles on the floor. Excited by all the space. They ate noodles from paper bowls and shared crackers. It wasn't much, but it was everything. After his sister fell asleep, he sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. His hands finally stopped shaking. He thought about how close they had come to losing it all. He thought about the people who helped them. He thought about tomorrow. School would be arranged. A social worker would help with documents. He could apply for a part-time job again. There was a long road ahead, but there was a road that mattered. He lay down beside his sister and listened to her steady breathing. The dog curled up at their feet. He whispered softly, so only the dark could hear, "We're going to be okay." He didn't know exactly how, but he believed it for the first time. Outside, cars passed and distant voices echoed. Inside, the room was quiet. He closed his eyes, letting sleep finally take him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, they had warmth, a roof, and each other. And after everything they had been through, that felt like a miracle. Morning light slipped through the small window and landed on the wall. He opened his eyes slowly, not sure where he was at first. Then he saw his sister curled up on the other bed, and the dog stretched across the floor between them. They were still inside. They still had a room. He sat up quietly and rubbed his face. His body felt sore, but it was a good kind of sore. The kind that came after surviving something hard. His sister woke a few minutes later. "Is this really ours?" she asked, looking around. "For now," he said. "Yeah." She smiled and hugged her blanket. They brushed their teeth in the shared bathroom down the hall. He helped her tie her shoes and fixed her hair with his fingers. The dog waited patiently by the door. A staff member knocked and brought breakfast. 2 sandwiches, milk cartons, and fruit. He thanked them and closed the door. They ate sitting on the beds, crumbs falling onto their laps. His sister laughed when the dog tried to steal her apple. That sound filled the room. Laughter. He hadn't heard it in days. Later that morning, a social worker came to talk with him. They explained how the program worked. He could finish school online for now. They would help him apply for a part-time job. His sister would be enrolled in a nearby school once things were settled. He nodded and listened carefully. It felt strange, hearing people talk about his future like it actually existed. They helped him fill out forms and gave him a small notebook to keep track of appointments. "Take it one step at a time," the social worker said. He wrote those words on the first page. One step at a time. That afternoon, a local charity dropped off clothes and basic supplies. Fresh towels, soap, a few canned foods, even a small bag of dog treats. His sister held up a new hoodie. "This is so soft," she said. He smiled. He folded everything neatly and placed it on the small table. He liked having things organized. It made him feel in control again. Over the next few days, they started building a routine. He woke up early and walked his sister to a temporary learning center down the street. He waited outside until she disappeared through the doors. Every time, she turned back and waved. He always waved back. Then he went to job centers, filled out applications, and cleaned tables at a cafe in exchange for a few dollars and hot meals. The owner told him to come back the next day. It wasn't much, but it was something. At night, they sat together on the beds and watched videos on his old phone, which now stayed charged. His sister showed him drawings she made at school. The dog slept with its head on his foot. He still had bad moments. Sometimes loud noises made him jump. Sometimes he woke up thinking he was back on the street. Sometimes he felt angry at the people who turned them away. But then he would look at his sister and he would breathe. One evening, she asked him a quiet question. "Are we going back there?" He knew what she meant. "No," he said. "We're moving forward." She nodded like she understood. A week later, he got a call from the cafe. They offered him regular shifts after school hours. He thanked them over and over until his voice cracked. He hung up and sat on the bed, staring at the wall. He had a job. He wasn't invisible anymore. That night, he brought home bread and soup with his first small paycheck. His sister clapped when she saw the bags. "You did it," she said. He laughed. "Yeah," he said. "We did." He started saving every dollar he could. He wrote down goals in his notebook. Bigger housing, proper school, a future where his sister wouldn't have to worry about sleeping outside ever again. Some days were still hard. He balanced homework with work shifts. He learned how to cook simple meals. He walked his sister to school even when rain fell. He talked to counselors about housing options. He grew tired, but he also grew stronger. One afternoon, his sister came home with a paper in her hand. "I got a star," she said. He knelt down and hugged her. "I'm proud of you." She wrapped her arms around his neck. Dog barked like it was joining the celebration. Weeks passed. Their room began to feel like home. They taped her drawings on the wall. He lined up shoes by the door. The dog learned where its food bowl belonged. Small things, important things. He thought often about that first night in the cold, about the bus stop, about the plastic sheet, about the storm. He knew he would never forget it, but he also knew it didn't own him anymore. One morning, as he walked his sister to school, the sun was bright and the air felt warm for the first time in a while. She skipped ahead. Holding the dog's leash. He followed, backpack over one shoulder, hands in his jacket pockets. He stopped for a moment and watched her. She was smiling. That was everything. He had been rejected at 16. He had slept outside. He had fought cold nights with empty hands. But he had also carried his sister through a storm. He had learned what it meant to protect someone. He had learned that family wasn't about who turned you away. It was about who you refused to leave behind. As they reached the school gate, she turned and ran back to hug him. "I love you," she said. He hugged her tight. "I love you too." She went inside. He stood there for a moment, then turned and started walking toward work. He didn't know exactly where life would take them, but he knew one thing. They were no longer surviving. They were rebuilding. And sometimes, that's the bravest thing anyone can do. Life didn't suddenly become easy. Even with a roof over their heads, every day still felt like a small battle. He woke up before sunrise most mornings. The building was quiet at that hour. He would wash his face in cold water, put on his jacket, and check on his sister before leaving. She always slept curled on her side, one hand wrapped around the blanket. The dog stayed close to her feet. He would stand there for a moment, just watching them breathe. Then he would head out. The cafe gave him early shifts twice a week. He cleaned tables, carried boxes, and learned how to make simple drinks. His hands smelled like soap and coffee most days. His back hurt, but he didn't complain. He saved every dollar he could. He kept his money folded inside his notebook, the same one where he wrote goals and appointments. Some nights, he counted it quietly, just to remind himself that things were moving forward, not fast, but forward. After work, he hurried back to walk his sister home from school. She would run toward him when she saw him waiting outside the gate. "You're early today." She'd say, "I didn't want to miss you," he'd reply. They walked back together, her telling him about spelling tests and drawings, him listening like every word mattered. Because it did. At home, he helped her with homework while the dog lay between them on the floor. Sometimes he struggled with the lessons himself, but they figured it out together. Some evenings, he cooked rice and canned vegetables. Other nights, they ate simple sandwiches. He tried to make it feel normal. Even when the food was plain, she never complained. One afternoon, a counselor asked to speak with him. They sat in a small office with soft lighting. The counselor asked how he was holding up. He shrugged. "I'm okay," he said. The counselor waited. He stared at the floor. Sometimes, he admitted, he felt tired in a way sleep didn't fix. Sometimes he felt angry for no clear reason. Sometimes he felt scared that everything could fall apart again. The counselor nodded. "That makes sense," they said. "You've been in survival mode for a long time." He didn't know what to say to that. They talked about stress, about trauma, about how it was okay to ask for help. He listened as he walked back to his room afterward. He realized something. He had spent so long being strong for everyone else that he forgot he was allowed to be tired. A few days later, his sister brought home a school form. They were planning a small field trip. It cost a little money. He stared at the paper, doing the math in his head. He could afford it if he skipped lunch for a few days. He signed the form. That night, he told her she was going on a trip. Her eyes lit up. "Really?" she asked. "Really?" She hugged him so hard, he almost lost his balance. Moments like that reminded him why he kept going. One evening, while walking the dog, he ran into the same volunteer who had given them blankets during the storm. She recognized him right away. "How are you doing?" she asked. "We're better," he said. He meant it. She smiled and told him. She was proud of him. Those words stayed with him all night. Weeks passed. He got better at his job. The cafe owner trusted him with closing shifts. He learned how to manage his time between work and online classes. His grades weren't perfect, but he was trying. His sister started making friends at school. She talked about them during dinner, about games they played and songs they sang. The dog gained weight and energy, chasing leaves outside like nothing bad had ever happened. Slowly, life began to feel less fragile, but some nights when everything was quiet, memories came back. The bus stop. The rain. Her coughing in the cold. He would sit on his bed and breathe through it, reminding himself that they were safe now. He started writing in his notebook before sleep. Not just goals. Thoughts. Fears. Things he was thankful for. He wrote about how proud he was of his sister, about how the dog always made them laugh, about how he wanted to become someone who helped others someday. He didn't know what that looked like yet, but the idea felt good. One morning, he received an email from a housing program. They had moved his application forward. If everything went well, they could help place them in a small apartment within a few months. He read the message 3 times to make sure it was real. He told his sister that night, "We might get our own place," he said. She gasped. "With a kitchen?" "Yes." "And windows?" "Yes." She smiled so wide it made his chest ache. He didn't celebrate too early. He had learned that life could change fast, but hope was starting to feel less dangerous. One weekend, the shelter organized a small community day. Families shared food. Kids played games. Music played from a speaker. He watched his sister run around with other children while the dog followed her like a shadow. Aha. Staff members stood beside him. You've done something remarkable, they said. He shook his head. I just did what I had to. Sometimes. He still heard those old words in his mind. You're old enough to figure it out. Back then, they felt cruel. Now, they felt different. He had figured it out not alone, but with courage. Long nights and a heart that refused to quit Dot as the sun set that evening. He sat on the steps outside their building, his sister beside him, the dog between them. She leaned against his arm. Thank you for not giving up, she said softly. He swallowed. Never, he replied. He looked up at the sky, now clear and calm. He didn't know exactly what their future would look like, but he knew this. They were no longer just survivors of a storm. They were builders of something new. And step by step, day by day, he was turning pain into strength and fear into forward motion. He wrapped an arm around his sister, pulled the dog closer, and sat there quietly. For the first time in a long while, the silence felt peaceful. The email came late in the afternoon. He almost missed it. He had just finished wiping down tables at the cafe when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He thought it might be his sister asking when he'd be home. Instead, it was a message from the housing program. He stepped outside into the quiet alley and opened it. They had approved their move. Not right away. Not tomorrow. But soon. A small apartment. 1 bedroom. A kitchen. A real door that locked. He leaned against the wall and let out a slow breath. He didn't realize he'd been holding soon. When he got back to their room that evening, his sister was sitting on the bed drawing. The dog wagged its tail when he walked in. He sat beside her. I have news, he said. She looked up. Good news? He nodded. We're getting our own place. Her pencil dropped to the floor. Really? Really? She jumped up and wrapped her arms around his neck. Does it have a kitchen? She asked, already knowing the answer. Yes. And windows? Yes. She laughed and hugged the dog next. That night, neither of them slept much. They talked about where the couch might go, even though they didn't have one yet. She said she wanted curtains with stars. He said they could figure that out later. For the first time, they were planning instead of surviving. The weeks that followed felt long and short at the same time. He kept working his shifts. He kept helping with homework. He kept saving every dollar. The social worker checked in often, helping with paperwork and explaining what to expect. He learned words he'd never thought about before. Lease, deposit, utilities. It all felt grown. Up. Some nights, he stared at the ceiling and wondered how he had become this person so fast. 16. Working. Raising a child. He didn't feel brave. He felt tired, but he also felt steady. One afternoon, his sister came home with a note from school. They were having a small performance. Parents were invited. He looked at the date. It was during one of his work shifts. He asked his manager if he could switch hours. The manager didn't hesitate. Go be there for her, they said. On the day of the performance, he sat in a hard folding chair at the back of the room. His sister stood on stage with other kids, singing a simple song about seasons changing. She searched the crowd until she found him. Their eyes met. She smiled. His chest tightened. He clapped louder than anyone when it ended. Afterward, she ran to him. Did you see me? She asked. I saw everything, he said. She held his hand all the way home. Moving day arrived on a quiet morning. They didn't have much to carry. Just backpacks, a few bags of clothes, some donated dishes, and the dog's blanket. A small van picked them up. As they drove, he watched familiar streets pass by. He thought about the bus stop, the alley, the parking garage, He felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. The building was simple. Beige walls, narrow hallways. But when they opened the door to their apartment, his sister gasped. "There's so much space," she said. There wasn't, but compared to everything they'd known, it felt huge. He walked through each room slowly. He opened cabinets. He turned on the sink. He stood by the window and watched sunlight fall across the floor. This was theirs. They set their things down wherever there was room. He made the beds. She lined her drawings along the wall. The dog explored every corner. That night, they sat on the floor and ate takeout noodles from paper containers. They didn't have chairs yet. They didn't care. He looked at his sister, sitting cross-legged, sauce on her chin, talking about how she wanted to grow plants on the windowsill. He laughed. Life still wasn't perfect. Money was tight. He had schoolwork waiting. Bills would come. But they had privacy. They had heat. They had a door that closed. Over the next days, he learned new routines. Taking out trash, washing dishes, sorting mail. He helped his sister pick a spot for her bed and promised they'd buy curtains. When he saved enough, he started cooking simple meals in their own kitchen. Rice, eggs, soup. He burned the toast once and they both laughed. He walked his sister to school from their new building. She waved at neighbors like she'd always lived there. The dog learned which window was theirs and waited by it every afternoon until they came home. Some evenings, he sat alone after his sister fell asleep. He thought about everything that had brought them here. The rejection, the cold, the storm. He realized something important. Those moments didn't break him. They shaped him. They taught him how strong love could be when there was nothing else. One weekend, they visited a small park nearby. His sister played on the swings. The dog chased birds. He sat on a bench and watched them. A stranger sat beside him. "Your kids look happy," the person said. He smiled. Softly. "They are." He didn't explain how close they'd come to losing everything. He didn't need to. That was their story. And it was still being written. Later that night, his sister crawled into his bed. "I like our home," she said. "So do I," he replied. She yawned. Double quotes. "Thank you for taking care of me." He pulled the blanket over her shoulders. "Always," he said. As she drifted off, he stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the building. He was 16. He was still figuring things out, but he had learned that courage doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like walking through rain with someone on your back. Sometimes it looks like skipping meals so someone else can eat. Sometimes it looks like showing up every day, even when you're scared. Closed his eyes. They had been rejected. They had been cold. They had been afraid. But they had also found kindness. They had found strength. And together, they had built a new beginning. The apartment slowly started to feel lived in. Not because it was full of furniture, but because it was full of life. His sister taped more drawings on the walls. He bought 2 cheap chairs from a second-hand store and carried them home himself. Someone from a local charity dropped off a small table and a lamp. The dog claimed one corner of the room as its own and refused to move from it. Every small change made the place feel warmer. He kept a simple routine. Wake up early, make breakfast, walk his sister to school, go to work or classes, come home, cook dinner, help with homework, clean up, walk the dog, sleep. Some days felt long, some days felt too short, but they were theirs. One afternoon, his sister came home quiet. She dropped her backpack near the door and sat on the bed without saying much. He noticed right away. "What happened?" he asked. She shrugged. Kids at school asked why we don't have parents, she said softly. His chest tightened. What did you tell them? She picked at the edge of her sleeve. I said I have you. He sat beside her. That's okay, he said. You don't owe anyone an explanation. She leaned into him. Sometimes I miss how things used to be, she whispered. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Me too. They sat like that for a while, listening to the sounds of neighbors in the hallway. He didn't try to fix everything with words. Sometimes. Just being there was enough. Later that evening, he took her to the small park near their building. She pushed the dog on the grass and laughed when it chased its own tail. He watched her from a bench. She was growing. Not just taller. Stronger. Braver. He felt proud. Work became steadier. The cafe gave him more hours on weekends. He learned how to manage orders and train new helpers. His manager trusted him with closing shifts and keys. He took that responsibility seriously. He still studied at night, even when his eyes felt heavy. He reminded himself that this mattered. That education was part of building something better. Some nights, he fell asleep with his notebook open beside him. He dreamed about simple things. A bigger kitchen, a couch, a future where his sister didn't worry about food or cold nights. One weekend, the social worker stopped by to check on them. They talked about school progress, housing plans, and long-term goals. You've come a long way, the social worker said. He nodded. I had help, he replied. That mattered to him. He knew he hadn't done this alone. Kind strangers, volunteers, teachers, people who chose to care. He tried to pass that kindness forward whenever he could. Once, he shared his lunch with another teen waiting for assistance in the same building. Another time, he helped carry groceries for an older neighbor. He didn't do it for praise. He did it because he remembered what it felt like to be unseen. One evening, his sister brought home a book from school. Can you read with me? She asked. He sat beside her on the bed and opened the book. He stumbled over a few words, but she didn't mind. She pointed to pictures and asked questions. They laughed when he used funny voices for the characters. The dog curled up against his leg. These moments were quiet, but they were everything. Money was still tight. He planned every purchase. He kept track of bills. He skipped treats so he could buy school supplies. Sometimes he worried late into the night about what would happen if he got sick or lost his job. But then morning would come, and he would get up, and he would keep going. One afternoon, while waiting outside his sister's school, he noticed another young kid standing alone by the fence. The kid looked lost. He walked over. Are you okay? He asked. The kid nodded but didn't speak. He stayed nearby until a teacher came out and guided the child inside. As he walked away, he thought about how easy it was to overlook someone who needed help. He promised himself he wouldn't do that. At home that night, his sister asked him a serious question. What do you want to be when you grow up? He smiled. I'm already growing up, he said. She frowned. No. Like a job. He thought for a moment. Maybe something where I can help people, he said. She nodded like that made perfect sense. I think you already do, she replied. Her words stayed with him. Weeks turned into months. Their apartment slowly filled with small signs of progress. A cheap rug, a second pillow, a calendar on the wall. He marked important dates with a pen. School, meetings. Doctor visits. He liked seeing plans written down. It reminded him they had a future. One quiet evening, after his sister had fallen asleep, he stood by the window and looked out at the city lights. He thought about the night they returned. Away. About the storm. About carrying his sister through the rain. He realized something. That version of him still lived inside. The scared one, the tired one, but also the strong one. one who didn't give up. He placed a hand on the glass. They had come so far, not because life suddenly became kind, but because he chose every day to show up, to protect, to try, to love. He walked back to the bed and pulled a blanket over his sister. The dog lifted its head and then went back to sleep, lay down beside them and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring more responsibilities, more challenges, more small victories. But tonight, there was peace. And for someone who once fought the cold with empty hands,